Hi, I'm Nigel Johns. I've heard it said that Jesus is the answer. But I'd like to look at how Jesus is not only the answer, he's often the questioner. We find in the Gospels some statistics that help us to see that, in fact, Jesus asked 307 questions. He's asked in return 183 questions, and we find that he only answers 3 of those questions directly. Our God is a God who often uses questions to open up our hearts, to open up our responses to him, to begin a conversation about a subject. One of the first statements we find in the Bible is God speaking to Adam, asking him, "Where are you?" Right through the Bible we see questions being used, and Jesus uses questions as amazing tools, as amazing instruments of healing power. Can we look together at Luke chapter 8 verses 43 to 56, where we see Jesus employing questions to devastating effect. Jesus employs the power of spirit-led questions in these scriptures to open people's hearts in a way that nothing else could. It begins where a distraught father has left his dying daughter's bedside to appeal for Christ to heal her. Now, when we think about this for a moment, this girl is drawing her dying breath. You would expect the father to remain by her bedside. But while there is still some hope, some possibility of healing, he goes to Christ, who is heard, has healed and can heal, and he leaves his dying daughter's bedside to find Christ the healer. And Mark tells us that this man, this father, in fact, was called Jairus, and he was a synagogue leader from a nearby town. And he came to appeal to Christ to heal his dying daughter. No one yet had had faith to believe for the raising of the dead. This man still believed his daughter was alive, and Christ would come to her while she was still living and save her from death. But we know that Christ has power even over death. So as Jesus began to go with Jairus to his home to minister healing to the girl, he became aware that an announcement was going to be made. This we find confirmed in verse 49, where messengers had come from Jairus' home to state that in fact the daughter had died already. I believe that Jesus knew what the effect of this would be on Jairus' faith. No one yet had believed for the raising of the dead. His faith would have been devastated. And so we see Christ, the answer and the questioner, begin to go into this healing mode where he was going to interact with Jairus and restore his faith, ready for this miracle in his daughter to be performed. As Jesus went along, accompanying Jairus back to his home, a crowd was pressing in on Jesus to reach and to touch him. And suddenly, Jesus stops. Now, I believe he was looking for some means to build up Jairus' faith in preparation for this devastation news that was coming. I believe Jesus was looking for an opportunity. And the woman with the issue of blood became the very person, the very testimony Jesus needed to encourage and restore Jairus' faith. So Jesus stopped the crowd and turned around and said, "Who touched me?" With this, the disciples even responded and almost ridiculed what Christ had said. "Who touched you? The whole crowd is pressing in on you, Lord." But with Jesus' call for that person to identify themselves, the woman who'd had the issue of blood and couldn't find any healing and had spent all their money on doctors, the woman who'd had the issue of blood and had now been healed within herself, came forward and gave testimony that she had been healed as she reached out to touch Christ. And just at that moment, messengers came from Jairus' home to say, don't trouble the master any further. Your daughter has already died. And Jesus turned round immediately to Jairus and spoke into this negativity, this defeat, this situation of his faith falling. And Jesus said to him, do not fear, only believe, and she will be made well. Now there is the statement of faith. This is a faith-filled word that Jesus is speaking into Jairus' heart. And we know that faith comes by hearing the word of Christ. And the word of Christ was spoken with effect into Jairus' life now. He'd heard the woman give testimony, and this encouraged his faith to believe that others were being healed of the Lord, who kept their faith in him. And so Jesus spoke into the situation, do not fear, only believe, and she will be made well. And so he hung on to this statement of Jesus and went with the Lord. When they got to Jairus' house, the mourners were there weeping and mourning, and Jesus said, the girl is not dead, she's only sleeping. And the mourners began to mock Jesus and ridicule him. So Jesus had to put them out. They had sympathy, but they didn't have faith to believe, which is what is necessary for a miracle prayer to be answered. And so Jesus went in with the mother and father of the 12-year-old girl, and he spoke into her life the words, Talitha, cumi. Little girl, I say to you, arise. And again now, here we've got the word of authority being commanded into the girl's life. We can't expect a faith response from her, but her father is in faith for this to happen. And this is the faith that Jesus needed to lever this miracle work into being. And so the little girl begins to shake herself and stirs, and Jesus takes her by the hand, raises her up off her bed, and says to the parents, give her food to eat. As this illness had progressed, she must have gone off her food and become very undernourished. And one of the first practical things following the raising of this girl from the dead, the Lord speaks a practical support to the parents. Give her some food to eat. And I'm sure they hurried off to the kitchen straight away. But we need encouragement to believe ourselves, because the Lord knows that our faith has often been discouraged and taken knocks, and sometimes we find it difficult to lift ourselves up to begin to believe for a miracle healing work of Jesus. And we need to hear encouraging testimonies of other people who say, Jesus did this for me. Sometimes the most powerful thing in a church service is where someone gives testimony of what the Lord has done for her, even more powerful than a preaching. And we need to hear these encouraging testimonies to believe for Jesus' healing in our own lives today. May God bless this teaching and this prayer for you into your hearts and lives today. Thank you. God bless you.